Fear Not, Episode 31. Hi, I'm Billy Atwell, and I believe that consistently facing your fears is the only way to realize your truest self and to make those confident choices that will help you to obtain your deepest held hopes and dreams. I have faith that this podcast series will show you that you are not alone, that it will strengthen you and give you courage to face your fears, and that it will help you to permanently cross over into a life of living beyond your fears. Join me on this journey as we listen and learn from others as they share their experiences in facing and overcoming their own fears. Hey everybody, today you and I are going to be joined by Jeff Brown. Hey Jeff, how are you today?
I am doing great. Billy, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much for asking me to be a part of this.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on the show. For nearly 30 years, Jeff has been earning his living behind a microphone, first as an award-winning broadcaster, and now as a successful podcaster, podcast coach, and speaker. Since July 2013, Jeff has served as the host to the Read to Lead podcast, a 3-time Best Business Podcast nominee, featuring interviews with today's best business book authors including Seth Godin, John Maxfield, Simon Sinek, Chris Brogan, Brian Tracy, Dan Miller, and so many more. Jeff has drawn upon his experience as a former on-air personality to coach and mentor new and upcoming podcasters. He specializes in helping clients understand how to leverage the intimacy of the medium, utilizing techniques that have enabled him and his clients to successfully stand out from the crowd. Jeff and his work have been featured in Inc. and Entrepreneur, the blogs of Seth Godin, Chris Brogan, Jeff Goins, and Social Media Explorer, as well as so many other publications, including the National Business Journal, the Tennessean, and hundreds of blogs and podcasts. Jeff, would you take a few minutes just to fill in the gaps and maybe give us a brief glimpse of your personal life?
Yeah, my personal life is such that I work from home. I've worked from home for about 3.5 years, and my wife does as well. We just added a third dog a month or two ago to our brood. We don't have any kids, but we love our little four-legged humans, we like to call them. And so it's a bit of a challenge sometimes when my wife and I both work from home. Her work involves building things, and that can get a little noisy. My work involves recording things, and I need quiet to do that. And so she will often be outside, thankfully on the other end of the house, other side of the house, outside making her noise with her power tools and all that, so that I can work quietly in here. But I do the podcast, Read to Lead, and I coach and mentor other podcasters throughout the week. I just launched book club for the listeners of my podcast, and that's gotten off to a great start. And so, my day is filled with, having conversations like this one, and hopefully along the way, being able to help people understand, what it takes to be successful, and that it's, I think, within the reach of anybody. It's just a matter of wanting it enough to do the things you need to do to get there.
Jeff, would you share with us one of the biggest fears that you've had to face?
Oh, where do I begin? I think one of the biggest, there's several, so I was kind of only half joking when I said, where do I begin? But certainly anytime you go from having spent the better part of your adult life working for somebody else to working for yourself and deciding that you're going to go all in on that can be a little scary. But I've also had different things I've attempted since then, things I've launched, starting a company, starting coaching, as you alluded to a moment ago, starting a podcast. I mean, the list is a mile long, and every one of those things, to one degree or another, I feared doing at one time. Just last week, I launched something that I'd been fearing launching for probably a year or more, and finally got it off the ground, and got past and got around that fear eventually. And so just about every time I do something, there's fear involved. In fact, I like to think that, unless you're living outside your comfort zone on a pretty regular basis and pushing those fear boundaries, you're not really living. So, we can be comfortable And that's one way to live life, but to me that's kind of a boring way to live. You know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. So, what do you do, Jeff, that helps you to face and overcome your fear, or at least not to have it stop you from achieving what you want to achieve?
Yeah, I really think, excuse me, I really think that starts with surrounding yourself with people who are going to challenge you, even mentor you, push you along the way. There are several of those things I listed a moment ago that would never have gotten off the ground if I didn't have people I was meeting with on a regular basis to push me to do things that I might think I'm not ready to do, or I might not be certain I'm ready to do. But because I have people, egging me on and cheering me on and convincing me that I am indeed qualified to do this thing or that thing. Without that, a lot of these things would have never gotten off the ground. I think of my coaching that I've been doing now for 3+ years. When I got into podcasting, I didn't get into podcasting or start a podcast so I could turn around and coach and mentor other podcasters. That's not why I did it. But about 6 months into it, I had some people I was close to, people I met with as part of a mastermind group, we call it, that were saying, this is something I needed to do. And it had never occurred to me. And I went into it initially reluctantly because not because I didn't want to do it, but because I wasn't sure I was cut out for it. I hadn't convinced myself, but they were convinced. And it was their confidence in me that gave me the confidence I needed to actually step out and do it. And here, 3+ years later, it's one of the most rewarding things that I do. So without their help, without their prodding and poking, and surrounding yourself with people who can be that and do that for you, I think it's really tough. If you're trying to do this solo and you don't have people speaking into your life in that way, it's going to be a whole lot harder.
With all your experience and all your success and just in life in general, with your journey, you must have come across some really great resources. Would you mind sharing some of those with us so that we could maybe possibly incorporate them into our own lives?
Great question. Yeah, and that can go a couple of different directions. That can go into the area of, habits and apps and things of that nature. But for me, when it comes to the things that work for me and making sure I get the things done that I want to get done or accomplish the goals that I want to accomplish, I have had to wrestle myself away, Billy, from living in a 100% digital world to understanding that what works for me is often analog. From 2000, the year 2000, until early 2015 or mid 2015, virtually everything I did in the way of keeping track of to-dos and schedule and goals and all that stuff was tracked digitally, right? In early 2015, I moved away from that stuff into analog form to the point that I have a day timer. Now, I do have a digital calendar. I haven't rid myself of that. I meet with clients, I meet with podcast guests, and they have to have a digital calendar to look at to see what my openings are and what's available, right? And so there is that. But all of that and anything else I schedule gets copied down into an analog day timer. I hand write it in a day timer. Sounds antiquated, right? But that works for me. Now, I also, at the beginning of a week, like on a Sunday evening or Sunday afternoon, I have this 2-page document. One page is labeled looking back. The other page is labeled looking ahead. And a looking back page, I look back at the week and I note the things that I accomplished and anything that was left undone or needs to carry over into the next week. And then I look at that looking ahead document and I make note of all the things I want to accomplish this week. What are the 3 most important? Like if I were to just only did 3 things, what would those 3 things be? It's not the only 3 things I'm going to do, but it's the 3 most important things. I identify those things. And then in the middle of that page, I begin to map out the steps I need to take this week to accomplish those 3 things. And again, I'm handwriting all this. I'm not typing this into Evernote, not that there's anything wrong with that or whatever system you might use. But I've found that for a lot of people who are working in the digital space, and I'm one of them, that stuff is kind of out of sight, out of mind is what ends up happening, right? I mean, we may have these various apps on our devices and whatever, but we've got to be a little bit more proactive and engaging with them. At least I found it. So I go to this sheet. I write those things down. I also make a note of people I want to connect with this week, or whether that's meeting them or over the phone or text or email. And when I finish that sheet, here's the key to all of what I've just said. When I finish that sheet and I've mapped out those 3 things that I must accomplish among the things I'm going to do, and I mapped out the steps that are going to take to get those things done, I go to that digital calendar. This is before the week has really begun. I go to that digital calendar, and there will be some appointments that have already been scheduled. But I think about, okay, how much of my time, make an estimate, is going to be necessary to accomplish those 3 most important things. And then I might go to my schedule in that digital calendar, and I actually schedule time throughout the week that I'm going to work on 1 or all 3 of those things, so that as the week begins and new requests for my time come up, as they inevitably do, they're not taking away from the time I've set aside to work on those specific things. Because here's what used to happen. Here's what happens if you don't do that. You write these things down and say, okay, I'm going to accomplish these 3 things. And then inevitably, people start requesting your time, and they plug in here and they plug in there. And the time you have to work on those 3 most important things is the time you have left over, if there is any, right? And so I have to make sure that at the very front of the week, I carve that out. I put that on my digital calendar so it doesn't show up as available time for anybody wanting to book time with me. I transfer that time I've carved out into my analog day timer. When I do this diligently, I do this consistently, it's all about being very intentional about your time. It's spending your time on paper before you spend it for real, much like a budget is with finances. A budget is about spending your money on paper before you spend it for real, so that you don't get to the end of the month and wonder where it all went. You're telling it where to go. This is about telling your time where to go and what you want it to do for you. So there's still a bit of digital at play here, but primarily for me, it involves a lot of writing things down. For me, there's something about the act of writing it down and then making sure once I've done that, I've carved out the time I think is going to be necessary to do that, so that nothing else gets in the way of those 3 things. Everybody else instead is vying for the leftover time, rather than the things most important to me vying for the leftover time.
That's a really good strategy, actually. And I've heard too from some of the neuroscientists that I've interviewed on this show that the act of writing actually sort of helps you to solidify your goals. It's more than just sort of, like you were saying, you digitize it and then you forget it. Yeah. Where this constant revision is actually sort of getting your brain, renewing your brain, and moving it towards the goal. Also, what is your favorite digital scheduler? Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah, I use Google Calendar for everything. So, I mean, there are occasional other apps that I'll try and for a while and see if I like, but related to to-dos and goals and that thing. But all that, whatever I might be using in the periphery, is all funneled back to ultimately Google Calendar. And so it's one of the main apps on the bottom tray of my phone. It's one of the main apps on the bottom tray of my iPad. It's my go-to on my desktop, and so everything funnels into Google Calendar and syncs so easily, oftentimes, with just about anything I might need it to. So nothing fancy, just Google Calendar as far as keeping track of those digital appointments is great for me. When it comes to clients or sometimes podcast guests setting appointments with me, I'll use an app called Calendly, which I know you're familiar with, which allows them to see, in a very easy to read format on mobile and elsewhere, the times I have available, the days I have available. And when they schedule a time, it syncs with Google Calendar automatically.
Yeah, I love Calendly. It's a great tool. Mm-hmm. And thank you for sharing. Are you ready for the speed round?
I was born ready.
All right, then. What person that's fictional or real has made the most impact on your life?
I would say probably a former boss of mine named Matt Austin, who helped rekindle my love of books. At the time I was working for him, he began to bring business and personal growth books into the workplace and encourage us to read them. And my love of reading before that really didn't exist. And so you could argue that he's singularly responsible for many of the things I do today, because they all started with my consistent and intentional reading.
And if you could change one thing in the world instantly, what would that be, Jeff?
Gosh, these are some deep questions, aren't they? If I could change one thing in the world instantly, I guess it would be for us all to be more accepting of each other's differences. I mean, that sounds like the beauty pageant answer, doesn't it? I want world peace. I mean, that's the struggle nowadays. It seems like more than anything is everybody's different. I mean, that's that's not revelatory or revolutionary in any way. But so many of us surround ourselves with people just like us, and I think we need to be more proactive in surrounding ourselves with people from different cultures and different walks of life, and understanding that we're all human. We're all more alike than we think, and these differences oftentimes are things that should not be dividing us, but should be things that unite us.
What's your biggest weakness?
I would say my biggest weakness is probably a good movie. I sometimes struggle with feelings of guilt by sitting for 2 hours and just sitting back and taking in a movie in the theater or at home, because I struggle with, well, I'm not being productive. I'm just consuming.
What's your biggest strength?
Gosh, my biggest strength, I guess I would say, is my communication skills, although it's not being evidenced here on the podcast. At least that's what I'm told. People feel like I'm a strong communicator. And so I'd like to think that what I've been doing the last 30 years is indication of that. It's all about communication. It's all about sharing ideas and getting people to act upon those ideas. So that's something that has come very naturally to me. And so I've tried to do the most that I can in that space and leverage that skill.
And if you could only have one book to read, what would that book be?
Yeah, for me, it would be the Bible. That's the one, because I just feel like though many who have not spent time with it might not agree with this, we're talking about words that were written thousands of years ago that are as applicable today as they were then, and only if you study it, oftentimes do you recognize that, or can you see that? And so that's I'm a man of faith, and so that's how God talks to me, right? And so if we're not careful, we can spend most of that interaction doing the talking ourselves, but we need to make sure that we're allowing ample time for God to talk to us, and that's often how He does it.
Do you have a favorite sound, Jeff?
It's probably it would either be a sound my wife makes or a sound my dogs make. Let's see, which one do I go with? If I went
Careful
with the spouse answer, it would be her laugh. I love making her laugh, and just like a really gut busting kind of laugh. Puts a smile on my face when I accomplish that. But then secondarily, I would say maybe the sounds of one of my dogs trying to get my attention with a whine or something that says, "Hey, I need you."
And if someone wants to connect with you, Jeff, what's the best way for them to do that?
Well, probably via the podcast that I do called the Read to Lead podcast. It's at readtoleadpodcast.com. Secondarily, I open registration a couple of times a year to a Read to Lead University book club. It's a sort of a derivative of Read to Lead podcast. readtoleaduniversity.com is the membership site for the book club. And so if you want to get on the waiting list and join us as we read new books each month and come together virtually every month to talk about them and Sometimes those discussions include the author themselves there right alongside us. Then readtoleaduniversity.com is the place to go to get on that waiting list.
And what parting of advice would you like to leave with us, Jeff?
Oh gosh, I guess I would just say when it comes to whatever it is you do, if you just make, I think, helping people your focus, I think you're going to succeed. If that's the sort of the place you start from with everything that you do, then success is around the corner for you at some point. So I try to approach my day, each conversation I have, each meeting I have with, thinking about, how can I be most helpful to the people that I'm, surrounded by today, the people I'm interacting with today. And I think that has helped me in a lot of ways. Before I launched my podcast, that's all I did. I didn't have anything to promote myself. And so I was always trying to help other people get the word out about their stuff. And when it came time for me to do something I wanted help getting the word out about, people seemed to want to line up to help me do that. And I think in part that was because I tried to be just always be helpful. So
that's great advice indeed. And thank you. And I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today, Jeff. It's been a great pleasure. And thank you so much for your time.
Well, my pleasure, Billy. I hope this is helpful to you and to your listeners. And I appreciate being asked and always consider it a treat.
Thank you for joining me today. And remember, you cannot achieve everything, but you do have the God-given ability to achieve anything. So stay focused, out of fear, and keep on keeping on. Until next time, be well and peaceful. For more information on today's episode and guest, or for resources that will assist you in overcoming your fears, visit livingbeyondyourfears.com. And don't forget to subscribe to this podcast, where 3 times a week we move to a life beyond our fears.